The royal decree came at midnight. Amadeo was to never set foot in the Luna's chambers again. The Luna Serafina Constantina Bellator stood in the marble corridor of the Moonstone Palace, her silver eyes blazing with a fury that made even the palace guards step back. In her trembling hand, she clutched the blood oath scroll that bound her son, the heir to the Northern Crescent throne, to the very Omega she'd just banished. The parchment smoked at the edges, ancient magic resisting her touch. "You dare defy pack law?" Serafina's voice echoed through the vaulted hallways. "That Omega has 20 minutes to leave these grounds, or I'll invoke the forbidden bloodline clause myself." But upstairs in the heir's chambers, 3-year-old Lorenzo Massimo Bellator pressed his small hands against the window, tears streaming down his cherub cheeks as he watched the only person who'd ever truly loved him walk away into the darkness. "Deo! Deo, come back!" the toddler screamed, his voice cracking with a desperation no child should know. And here's what nobody expected. Amadeo de Laurentiis stopped walking. He turned back toward the palace, his Omega eyes glowing gold in the moonlight, and something ancient and terrible stirred in the air around him. The Luna's blood oath began to crack. "Before we continue, tell me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug, because what happens next will shatter everything you think you know about forbidden love and royal bloodlines." 48 hours earlier, the palace had been celebrating. The Alpha King, Valentino Drago Bellator, had just returned from the Western campaign victorious, and the entire pack gathered in the Great Hall for the triumph feast. Amadeo stood in the shadows of the servants' corridor, as Omegas always did during royal celebrations, watching through the crack in the door as the Luna laughed and raised her crystal goblet high. Serafina was magnificent, everyone said so. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves down her back, threaded with silver that marked her as blessed by the moon goddess herself. She wore the ceremonial robes of Luna, deep purple silk that cost more than most Omegas earned in a lifetime. She was everything an Omega like Amadeo could never be. Powerful, respected, beloved. And yet, as Amadeo watched her celebrate, he felt nothing but sorrow for her, because he knew something she didn't. He knew that every night for the past 6 months, her son Lorenzo had refused to sleep until Amadeo came to his chambers. He knew that the heir to the throne, the precious prince who would one day rule the Northern Crescent pack, called him Deo with more love than he'd ever shown his own mother. He knew that last week, when Lorenzo had skinned his knee in the garden, he'd run past the Luna without even seeing her, straight into Amadeo's arms. "Omega!" A sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Stop lurking like a shadow and bring more wine to the high table." Amadeo bowed his head and hurried to obey. This was his place. This was all he'd ever have. He was Amadeo de Laurentiis, orphaned Omega from the forbidden bloodline that everyone pretended didn't exist, working as a nanny in the palace because it was the only job an unmated male Omega could hold in the royal household. He should be grateful. He should be content. But when he approached the high table with the wine pitcher, something happened that changed everything. Lorenzo saw him. The toddler, who'd been sitting in a specially carved chair next to his mother, suddenly squealed with delight and lunged forward, tiny arms reaching desperately across the table. "Deo! Deo! Up!" The entire great hall fell silent. Serafina's face went white, then red, then white again. She grabbed Lorenzo's arm, pulling him back into his seat with enough force to make the child yelp. "Lorenzo Massimo Bellator, you will address your nanny with proper respect in public." But Lorenzo, who was only 3 and didn't understand the intricate politics of pack hierarchy, started crying. Not the fussy whine of a spoiled child, but the heartbroken sobs of a toddler who needed comfort and couldn't understand why he was being denied it. "Want Deo!" Lorenzo wailed, tears and snot running down his face. "Want Deo now!" Amadeo stood frozen, the wine pitcher trembling in his hands. Every instinct in his Omega nature screamed at him to go to the child, to comfort him, to make the crying stop. But pack law was absolute. A servant never approached the heir without permission from the Luna, especially not in front of the entire pack. The Alpha King, Valentino, looked between his sobbing son, his furious mate, and the Omega servant who stood helplessly in the middle of it all. His expression was unreadable, carved from granite and pack law. "Omega," Valentino said quietly, his alpha voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. "Approach." Amadeo's legs moved before his brain could process the command. He set down the wine pitcher and walked to the high table, every eye in the great hall burning into his back. He could hear the whispers starting already, the speculation, the judgment. When he reached the table, he bowed deeply. "Alpha King." "My son wants you," Valentino said, his dark eyes studying Amadeo's face. "Why?" "It was a test. Everything with alphas was a test." "I don't know, Alpha King," Amadeo answered truthfully. "Children sometimes form attachments to their caregivers. It's natural." "Natural?" Serafina spat the word like poison. "There's nothing natural about this. He's the heir to the throne and you're—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Everyone in the great hall knew what Amadeo was. An Omega from the forbidden bloodline. A De Laurentiis. A descendant of the traitors who tried to overthrow the throne 3 generations ago. His family name had been stripped of all rank and privilege, reduced to serving the very bloodline they'd once challenged. And now that Omega was holding the heart of their heir. "Take him," Valentino said suddenly. "Calm my son down." "Valentino." Serafina's voice was sharp with warning. "You can't be serious. Not in front of the entire pack. It makes us look weak." "What makes us look weak," Valentino said coldly, "is our heir screaming at a triumph feast. Take the child, Omega. Now." Amadeo reached across the table, and Lorenzo practically threw himself into his arms. The toddler buried his face in Amadeo's neck, his tiny body shaking with sobs that gradually quieted to hiccups. Amadeo rubbed gentle circles on the child's back, murmuring soft words that only Lorenzo could hear. The change was instantaneous. Lorenzo's crying stopped. His breathing steadied. Within 30 seconds, the heir to the Northern Crescent throne was calm, content, his little fingers clutching Amadeo's shirt like a lifeline. The whispers in the great hall grew louder. Serafina stood up so fast her chair crashed backward. "Get that Omega out of my sight," she hissed. "Now." Amadeo bowed again, Lorenzo still in his arms, and retreated from the great hall. As he walked through the corridors toward the nursery wing, he could hear the feast resuming behind him, the sound of forced laughter and nervous conversation. He knew in that moment that everything had changed. He'd been exposed. His connection to the heir was no longer a quiet secret between nursery walls. It was public knowledge now, seen by every ranking member of the pack. And in pack politics, public knowledge was dangerous. What Amadeo didn't know was that Serafina had already made her decision. The Omega would be gone by morning, no matter what blood oath protected him. The blood oath had been Valentino's idea. 6 months ago, when Lorenzo was still recovering from the fever that had nearly killed him, the Alpha King had summoned Amadeo to his private study. Amadeo had been terrified. Omegas were never summoned to the Alpha's private chambers unless something had gone very wrong. But Valentino hadn't punished him. Instead, the Alpha King had done something far more complicated. "My son is alive because of you," Valentino had said, his voice rough with an emotion Amadeo couldn't identify. "The healers said he was dying, but you sat with him every night. You sang to him. You refused to let him go." Amadeo had kept his eyes on the floor. "I was just doing my duty, Alpha King." "No," Valentino had said sharply. "Duty is following orders. What you did was care for my son when nobody else believed he would survive. The Luna was too overcome with grief to sit with him. The healers had given up. But you stayed." Amadeo hadn't known what to say to that, so he'd said nothing. Valentino had pulled out a scroll of ancient parchment, the kind only used for blood oaths. "Lorenzo trusts you. More than that, he needs you. And I won't let pack politics take away the one person who can actually keep my son safe. So I'm binding you to him with a blood oath. You will serve as his guardian until he comes of age. Alpha King, I don't deserve. What you deserve is irrelevant. Valentino had cut him off. This is about what my son needs. Do you accept the oath? Amadeo had looked at the scroll, understanding the weight of what was being offered. A blood oath couldn't be broken, not by the Luna, not even by pack law. It would bind him to Lorenzo permanently, protect him from dismissal, guarantee his place in the palace until the heir reached adulthood. It would also make him a permanent target for everyone who hated his bloodline. I accept, Amadeo had whispered. Valentino had pricked both their fingers, mixing their blood on the parchment. The scroll had glowed with golden light, the ancient magic sealing the bond. You're his now, Valentino had said. And he's yours. Let anyone try to break this oath. That oath was the only thing standing between Amadeo and immediate banishment after the disaster at the Triumph Feast. But Serafina was Luna, and Lunas had ways of getting around even the most sacred bonds. At 3 a.m, Amadeo woke to the sound of someone picking the lock on his chamber door. He lived in the servants' quarters, a small room with a narrow bed and a single window that looked out over the kitchen gardens. It wasn't much, but it was his. And now someone was trying to break in. Amadeo sat up slowly, his omega senses immediately on alert. He could smell alpha musk, sharp and aggressive. Guards. The door opened and 3 palace guards entered, their expressions apologetic but determined. The lead guard, an alpha named Marco, held a scroll in his hand. Amadeo de Laurentiis, Marco said formally. By order of Luna Serafina Constantina Bellator, you are hereby dismissed from service to the royal household. You have 20 minutes to gather your belongings and leave the palace grounds. The blood oath has been nullified. Amadeo's heart stopped. Nullified? That's impossible. The Alpha King himself. The Luna invoked the forbidden bloodline clause, Marco said, and his voice held genuine regret. She's claiming that your family's treason makes you a threat to the heir. The Council of Elders agreed. The blood oath is broken. No, Amadeo whispered. No, you can't. The forbidden bloodline clause can only be used if there's actual evidence of treason. I've done nothing. The evidence is the heir's attachment to you, another guard said quietly. The Luna claims you're using omega manipulation to control the child. That you're planning to use him to restore your family's name. It was absurd. It was monstrous. It was also perfectly legal under pack law. Amadeo felt his world crumbling. Let me say goodbye to him, please. Just let me say goodbye to Lorenzo. Marco shook his head. The heir is with the Luna. You're not permitted near him. I'm sorry, Amadeo. Truly. But orders are orders. They escorted him out of the palace like a criminal, through the servants' entrance at the back of the compound. Amadeo carried a single bag with his few possessions, his mind numb with shock. This couldn't be happening. The blood oath was unbreakable. Valentino had promised. But Valentino hadn't been consulted. This was the Luna's doing, and the Luna's word was law when it came to the safety of her child. As Amadeo walked through the gates, he heard it, a scream from high above, from the windows of the heir's chambers. Deo! Deo, come back! Lorenzo's voice, raw with panic and betrayal, echoed across the palace grounds. Amadeo turned back, tears streaming down his face, and saw the small figure pressed against the window, his tiny hands beating on the glass. And then Serafina appeared behind Lorenzo, pulling the child away from the window. The curtains closed. Amadeo stood there in the darkness, listening to Lorenzo's screams fade into the distance, and something broke inside him. Not just his heart, something deeper, something primal. His omega nature, which had always been gentle and submissive, suddenly surged with a fury he'd never felt before. The forbidden bloodline wasn't forbidden because of treason. It was forbidden because De Laurentiis Omegas had power. 3 nights later, Lorenzo still wouldn't sleep. Serafina sat in the nursery, exhausted beyond measure, watching her son pace back and forth in his crib. Every time he lay down, he'd start screaming again. Want Deo. Want Deo. Mama, bring Deo back. Lorenzo, stop this, Serafina said, trying to keep her voice gentle despite the exhaustion. Deo isn't coming back. He's gone. No. Lorenzo threw his stuffed wolf across the room. Deo comes back. He always comes back. Serafina felt a spike of irrational jealousy. She was his mother. She was the Luna. She was supposed to be the one he needed, the one he called for. Not some Omega servant with a traitor's bloodline. A gentle knock on the door. Valentino entered, his expression dark. Still won't sleep, he asked. It's been 3 nights, Serafina said tightly. He screams until he passes out from exhaustion. The healers say if this continues much longer, it will damage his health. Valentino looked at his son, and something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or anger. You broke a blood oath, Serafina. Did you think there would be no consequences? I protected our son from manipulation. Serafina stood up, her own exhaustion making her voice sharp. That Omega was using his bond to control Lorenzo, to make him dependent. Can't you see that? He's a De Laurentiis. His family tried to overthrow your grandfather. His family died for that treason, Valentino said coldly. Amadeo was a child when it happened. He's paid for their sins his entire life. And he was planning to use our son to erase that debt. Was he? Valentino challenged. Or did he simply love a child who desperately needed love? Serafina recoiled as if he'd slapped her. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Valentino said wearily. I'm stating facts. Our son formed a bond with his caregiver. Healthy, natural bond. And you destroyed it because of politics and pride. I destroyed it to protect him. From what? Valentino's voice rose. From being loved. From having someone who puts his needs above pack politics. They stared at each other across the nursery. The chasm between them suddenly vast and terrible. In his crib, Lorenzo had finally cried himself to sleep. His small body curled into a ball, tear tracks staining his cherubic face. I want the Omega back, Valentino said quietly. No, Serafina said flatly. Never. It wasn't a request, Valentino said. His alpha command bleeding into his voice. I'm invoking my right as Alpha King to overturn your decree. Amadeo De Laurentiis returns to the palace tomorrow. If you do this, Serafina said, her voice shaking with fury, you'll regret it. I promise you that. Valentino looked at his sleeping son, then back at his mate. I already regret not stopping you 3 days ago. He left the nursery, and Serafina stood alone in the darkness, listening to her son's labored breathing. She'd won so many battles in her life through sheer force of will and political cunning. But this battle, the battle for her son's heart, she was losing to an Omega she'd already banished. And Serafina Constantina Bellator did not accept defeat. Amadeo was staying in a run-down boarding house in the city's Omega district when the summons came. He'd spent the past 3 days in a haze of grief and shock, unable to eat, unable to sleep, replaying Lorenzo's screams over and over in his mind. The other Omegas in the boarding house gave him pitying looks but kept their distance. Everyone knew what it meant to be dismissed from the palace. It meant you were damaged goods, untouchable, possibly dangerous. When the royal messenger arrived with the Alpha King's seal, Amadeo thought he was hallucinating. Amadeo De Laurentiis, the messenger said formally. The Alpha King commands your immediate return to the palace. Your blood oath has been reinstated. Amadeo stared at the scroll, not daring to hope. The Luna. The Alpha King has overruled the Luna's decree, the messenger said. The Council of Elders has withdrawn their support of the forbidden bloodline clause. You're to return immediately and resume your duties as guardian to the heir. Amadeo's hands shook as he took the scroll. Is Lorenzo all right? The messenger's formal expression cracked slightly. The heir hasn't slept in 3 days. The healers are concerned. That's all I can say. 20 minutes later, Amadeo was in a royal carriage heading back to the palace. His heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. They wanted him back. Valentino had fought for him. The blood oath was restored. But as the carriage pulled through the palace gates, Amadeo saw Serafina standing on the front steps, her arms crossed, her silver eyes burning with cold fury. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Lorenzo was asleep when Amadeo entered the nursery, but his sleep was fitful. His small face pinched with distress even in unconsciousness. Amadeo's heart broke at the sight of him. "Lorenzo," Amadeo whispered, kneeling beside the crib. "I'm here. I'm back." The toddler's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he just stared at Amadeo, as if afraid he was dreaming. Then recognition dawned, and Lorenzo let out a sob of pure relief. "Deo!" he cried, reaching up with grabbing hands. Deo came back. Amadeo lifted Lorenzo out of the crib, holding him close as the child clung to him with desperate strength. "I'm here," Amadeo murmured into Lorenzo's dark curls. "I'm here, little prince. I'll always come back." "Mama said you left," Lorenzo sobbed against his neck. "Said you didn't want me." Amadeo felt rage flash through him. Pure, hot omega rage that made his eyes glow gold. To tell a child that his caregiver abandoned him was cruel beyond measure. "Your mama was wrong," Amadeo said gently, swallowing his anger. "I would never leave you by choice. Never." Lorenzo's grip tightened. "Promise." "I promise," Amadeo whispered, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The nursery door opened. Serafina stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes told a different story. She looked at Amadeo holding her son, saw Lorenzo's complete contentment in the Omega's arms, and something dark crossed her face. "So the Alpha King got his way," she said coolly. "How lovely." Amadeo stood, Lorenzo still in his arms, and met the Luna's gaze directly. It was a breach of protocol. Omegas never made eye contact with the Luna, but Amadeo was done being submissive. "Luna Serafina, I've returned to fulfill my blood oath." "How noble," Serafina said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Amadeo de Laurentiis, what exactly do you think this bond with my son will earn you?" "Restoration of your family name. A place at the high table. Perhaps you're hoping to catch the eye of an unmated alpha with your devotion to the heir." Every word was designed to wound, to reduce him to the status-climbing Omega she wanted him to be. "I want nothing," Amadeo said quietly, "except to care for Lorenzo. That's all I've ever wanted." "Liar," Serafina hissed. "Every Omega wants something. Status, protection, a mate. You're no different." Lorenzo, who'd been listening to this exchange with growing distress, suddenly spoke up in his small voice. "Mama mean to Deo." Serafina's face went pale. "Lorenzo. Mama mean." Lorenzo said louder, burrowing deeper into Amadeo's arms. "Don't like Mama. Like Deo." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. A child choosing his nanny over his mother, and saying so out loud, was a violation of natural pack hierarchy. It suggested that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Serafina's hands clenched into fists. "Get out," she said to Amadeo, her voice shaking. "Take him to bed. Get out of my sight." Amadeo bowed, still holding Lorenzo, and retreated to the smaller bedroom attached to the nursery. As he closed the door, he heard Serafina's ragged breathing, the sound of someone trying not to scream. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was personal. For the next 2 weeks, an uneasy peace settled over the palace. Amadeo resumed his duties as Lorenzo's guardian, and the heir's health improved dramatically. He slept through the nights again, ate his meals without fussing, and laughed during his lessons. To everyone in the palace, it was clear that the bond between the Omega and the child was essential to Lorenzo's well-being. To Serafina, it was a daily torture. She watched her son run past her every morning, calling for Deo, before he even looked for his mother. She saw him fall and scrape his knee in the garden, and instead of crying for her, He ran to the Omega, who scooped him up and kissed the herd away. She heard him at night, talking to Amadeo through the nursery walls. His little voice full of trust and love that he never showed her. And it was destroying her. "You need to let this go," Valentino told her one night as they prepared for bed. "Lorenzo is happy. Healthy. That's what matters." "What matters," Serafina said coldly, "is that I'm losing my son to a servant. You're not losing him. You're just sharing his affection. I shouldn't have to share it." Serafina's voice rose. "I'm his mother. Is Luna. He should love me above everyone else. That's pack law." "Pack law doesn't govern a child's heart," Valentino said wearily. "Maybe if you spent more time with him instead of obsessing over protocol." "Don't you dare," Serafina hissed. "Don't you dare suggest I'm a bad mother because I won't compete with an Omega for my own son's love." Valentino studied his mate, and for the first time in their 10 years together, he felt the distance between them like a physical thing. "This isn't about Lorenzo," he said quietly. "This is about your pride." Serafina's silver eyes flashed. "Get out." "Serafina. I said get out." Valentino left their chambers, and Serafina was alone with her fury and her fear. Because deep down, beneath all the pride and politics, she was terrified of a simple truth. Her son didn't need her. He needed Amadeo. And she had no idea how to fix it. The breaking point came during the spring council meeting. Once a season, the Alpha King convened the Council of Elders to discuss pack matters and settle disputes. These meetings were usually tedious affairs of territory negotiations and trade agreements. But this spring council was different, because Serafina had spent weeks preparing for it. She'd called in favors, made promises, spread carefully crafted rumors about the De Laurentiis Omega who'd bewitched the heir. By the time the council convened, half the elders were already convinced that Amadeo was a threat to the pack. The meeting was held in the Great Hall, with all the ranking members of the pack in attendance. Amadeo, as a servant, watched from the shadows, Lorenzo playing quietly with wooden wolves at his feet. The chair recognizes Luna Serafina, the head elder, an ancient alpha named Dante Giovanni announced. Serafina stood, regal in her ceremonial robes. "Honored elders, I bring a matter of grave concern to this council. My son, the heir to the Northern Crescent throne, has formed an unnatural attachment to his Omega caregiver. This attachment violates pack hierarchy and poses a threat to his proper development." Murmurs rippled through the hall. The Luna speaks of Amadeo De Laurentiis. Another elder, a sharp-eyed woman named Bianca, said, "The Omega under blood oath to the Alpha King." "A blood oath that should never have been made," Serafina said smoothly. "The De Laurentiis bloodline is forbidden for a reason. They're descended from traitors who tried to use Omega manipulation to overthrow the throne. And now history is repeating itself." "That's a serious accusation," Dante said, frowning. "Do you have evidence of manipulation?" "I have a 3-year-old heir who loves a servant more than his own mother," Serafina said, and her voice cracked with genuine pain. "I have a child who won't eat unless the Omega feeds him, won't sleep unless the Omega sings to him, won't accept comfort from anyone else. If that isn't manipulation, what is it?" The hall fell silent. Even Amadeo, hidden in the shadows, felt the weight of those words. 'Cause she was right in a way. Lorenzo did prefer him. And in pack hierarchy that was wrong. Valentino stood, his face dark. "What my mate calls manipulation I call love. Amadeo has done nothing but care for our son with devotion and selflessness. The bond between them is natural, not magical." "Is it natural," Serafina challenged, "for a child to reject his mother? Is it natural for an heir to the throne to show more loyalty to a servant than to his Luna? Or is it possible that we're seeing the same Omega powers that allowed the De Laurentiis family to nearly destroy this pack?" The elders shifted uncomfortably. The old stories of Omega manipulation were legendary. Omegas who could influence emotions, create false bonds, twist loyalties. Most modern wolves dismissed these stories as superstition, But in the presence of an heir who clearly preferred his nanny to his mother, doubt crept in. "I propose," Serafina said, her voice ringing with authority, "that we test the Omega. If his bond with Lorenzo is natural, it will withstand separation. But if it's manipulation, the bond will break when the magic is no longer reinforced." "You want to separate them again," Valentino said incredulously. "We tried that. Lorenzo nearly made himself sick." "Then we test it properly," Serafina said. "We send the Omega away for one full moon cycle. If Lorenzo adjusts and bonds normally with other caregivers, we'll know the attachment was artificial. If he doesn't adjust, then perhaps the bond is real." It was a trap, and Amadeo saw it clearly. If Lorenzo adjusted to his absence, Serafina would use it as proof that the bond was Omega manipulation, and Amadeo would be banished forever. If Lorenzo didn't adjust, Serafina would claim he was too damaged by the manipulation to recover, and Amadeo would still be banished for harming the heir. Either way, Amadeo lost. "I object," Valentino said flatly. "The blood oath can be temporarily suspended by council vote," Dante interrupted. "The Luna is within her rights to request this test." All in favor. 6 hands rose. The majority of the council. All opposed. 4 hands, including Valentino's. "The motion carries," Dante announced. Amadeo de Laurentiis will be separated from the heir for one full moon cycle, beginning at sunrise tomorrow. The blood oath is temporarily suspended. In the shadows, Amadeo felt his world end for the second time. And at his feet, Lorenzo looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, completely unaware that his mother had just sentenced him to another abandonment. Amadeo held Lorenzo all night. The toddler had sensed something was wrong and clung to him with unusual intensity, as if he knew this might be their last night together. Amadeo sang every lullaby he knew, told every story, memorized every detail of Lorenzo's face so he could hold on to it during the long separation ahead. "Deo stay forever?" Lorenzo asked sleepily, his head resting on Amadeo's chest. Amadeo's throat tightened. He couldn't lie to the child, but he couldn't tell him the truth either. "I'll always love you, little prince. No matter where I am. Promise." "I promise," Amadeo whispered, pressing a kiss to Lorenzo's dark curls. Lorenzo fell asleep around midnight, his small hand fisted in Amadeo's shirt. Amadeo stayed awake until dawn, watching the sun rise through the nursery window, counting down the final minutes of their time together. When the palace guards came, Amadeo had already packed his bag. "It's time," Marco said gently. He was the same guard who'd escorted Amadeo out before, and his expression held the same regret. "Can I wake him to say goodbye?" Amadeo asked. Marco shook his head. "The Luna's orders. She says it will be easier if he wakes up and you're already gone." Easier for whom? Amadeo wanted to scream. Not for Lorenzo, who would wake up alone and betrayed again. Not for me, who has to leave without explaining why. But pack law was absolute. Amadeo carefully disentangled himself from Lorenzo's grip, laying the sleeping child back in his crib. He pulled the blanket up to Lorenzo's chin, tucked his favorite stuffed wolf into his arms, and stood there for one last moment, memorizing everything. "I love you," Amadeo whispered. "I'll come back. I promise." Then he turned and walked out of the nursery before his resolve could break. As he passed through the palace corridors for what might be the last time, he saw Serafina standing at the window, watching him leave. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Amadeo saw something unexpected in her expression. Not triumph but sadness. As if she knew she'd won the battle but might still lose the war. Then he was outside, walking through the palace gates, the morning sun cold on his face. Behind him he heard it start, the screaming. Lorenzo had woken up. The moon cycle passed with agonizing slowness. Amadeo found work at a tavern in the city, serving drinks and cleaning tables, trying to keep himself busy enough that he wouldn't think about Lorenzo every waking moment. Didn't work. Every small child he saw reminded him of the heir. Every dark-haired toddler made his heart clench. And every night, as the moon traced its path across the sky, he wondered if Lorenzo was sleeping, if he was eating, if he'd forgotten about his Deo. In the palace, things were deteriorating rapidly. Lorenzo had screamed himself hoarse that first morning, and then he'd simply shut down. He stopped eating, stopped playing, stopped talking to anyone. He'd sit by his window for hours, watching the gate, waiting for Amadeo to come back. Serafina tried everything. She brought in new nannies, but Lorenzo screamed when they touched him. She offered him treats, toys, anything to make him smile. He ignored it all. She even tried to cuddle him herself, but Lorenzo went stiff in her arms, his eyes vacant and distant. "He's grieving," the head healer told Serafina on the 5th day. "Children his age don't understand temporary separation. To him, Amadeo is dead." "He's not dead," Serafina snapped. "He's just gone for a month." "The child doesn't know that," the healer said gently. "All he knows is that the person he loved most in the world disappeared without explanation." Again, Serafina felt guilt twist in her chest, but she pushed it away. This was necessary. This would prove that Amadeo had been manipulating Lorenzo, and then everything would go back to normal. Except it didn't. By the 2nd week, Lorenzo had stopped eating entirely. The healers had to force broth down his throat to keep him alive. He'd lost weight, his cherubic face becoming gaunt and hollow. His eyes, once bright with childhood wonder, had gone dull. "If this continues," the head healer said on day 16, "the heir will die. Not from illness, but from a broken heart. I've seen it happen with orphaned pups who lose their caregivers. The body simply gives up." Valentino stood in the nursery, looking at his son who lay curled in his crib, staring at nothing. "How much longer until the moon cycle ends?" 12 days, Serafina said, her voice hollow. She'd barely slept since this started, spending every night in the nursery, watching Lorenzo waste away. "He won't last 12 more days, Valentino said flatly. "Look at him, Serafina. Really look at him." Serafina looked. She saw a child who was dying of grief for someone who wasn't even his mother. And the worst part was she understood why. Because in the weeks since Amadeo had been gone, Serafina had finally paid attention to what the Omega had actually done for her son. She'd discovered the lullabies Amadeo had composed specifically for Lorenzo, songs about brave little wolves who became kings. She'd found the storybooks Amadeo had hand-copied because Lorenzo loved certain tales and the palace library only had one copy. She'd seen the detailed notes Amadeo kept about Lorenzo's favorite foods, his fears, his dreams, his little victories. Amadeo had loved her son with a devotion that put her own motherhood to shame. "Call him back," Valentino said quietly. "End this test. Call Amadeo back before we lose Lorenzo forever." Serafina's pride warred with her love for her son. If she called Amadeo back early, she'd be admitting she was wrong. Admitting that the Omega's bond with Lorenzo was real, not manipulation. Admitting that she'd nearly killed her own child because she couldn't bear to share his love. But if she didn't call him back, Lorenzo would die. "Send for the Omega," Serafina whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Bring him back now." Amadeo was halfway through his shift at the tavern when the royal messenger burst through the door. "Amadeo de Laurentiis. The Alpha King commands your immediate return. The heir is dying." The pitcher Amadeo was holding crashed to the floor. He didn't remember the carriage ride back to the palace. Didn't remember running through the corridors. All he knew was that Lorenzo was dying, and he'd been away for 16 days when he should have fought harder to stay. When he burst into the nursery, the scene that greeted him was nightmarish. Lorenzo lay in his crib, small and still, his breathing shallow. His skin had a grayish cast that spoke of severe malnutrition. Healers surrounded him, trying to coax life back into a body that had already given up. "Lorenzo," Amadeo gasped, shoving past the healers to reach the crib. Lorenzo, I'm here. I'm back. Nothing. No response. The toddler's eyes remained closed. Amadeo lifted Lorenzo into his arms, feeling how light he'd become, and something broke inside him. This was his fault. He should have refused to leave. Should have fought the council. Should have stayed even if they'd thrown him in the dungeons. Please, Amadeo whispered, pressing his forehead to Lorenzo's. Please, little prince. I'm here. Came back like I promised. Please don't leave me. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Lorenzo's eyes fluttered open. Deo! The word was barely a breath, so quiet Amadeo almost missed it. Yes, Amadeo sobbed. Yes, it's me. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Lorenzo's small hand reached up, touching Amadeo's face as if to confirm he was real. You came back. I'll always come back, Amadeo promised. Always. They'll have to kill me before I leave you again. Something shifted in Lorenzo then. Color began to return to his cheeks. His breathing deepened. The healers gasped as the child's vital signs, which had been failing moments ago, suddenly stabilized. It's a miracle, one healer whispered. But it wasn't a miracle. It was a bond, the kind that transcended blood oaths and pack law. The kind that proved Amadeo hadn't been manipulating Lorenzo. Lorenzo had been dying because he genuinely loved Amadeo, and losing him had been more than his young heart could bear. Serafina watched all this from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. She'd won nothing. She'd nearly killed her own son trying to prove a point about hierarchy and bloodlines. And now she had to live with the knowledge that she was not the most important person in Lorenzo's world. That honor belonged to an Omega she'd tried to destroy. The recovery took weeks. Lorenzo wouldn't let Amadeo out of his sight for even a moment. If Amadeo tried to leave the room, Lorenzo would panic, his breathing becoming labored, his small body trembling with fear. So Amadeo stayed, sleeping on the floor next to Lorenzo's crib, eating his meals in the nursery, conducting his entire life within those four walls until Lorenzo felt secure again. Palace talk. Course they talk. The heir's attachment to his Omega nanny had nearly killed him. The Luna had been forced to recall the Omega before the test period ended. The Alpha King and Luna barely spoke to each other anymore. And through it all, Amadeo just focused on healing Lorenzo. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. Tell me a story, Lorenzo would whisper at night, his hand clutching Amadeo's sleeve. And Amadeo would tell him stories. Not the sanitized tales from the palace library, but real stories. Stories about his own childhood as an Omega from a forbidden bloodline. Stories about overcoming fear and finding strength in unexpected places. Stories about love that survived even when the world said it shouldn't exist. One night, 3 weeks after Amadeo's return, Lorenzo finally asked the question Amadeo had been dreading. Why did you leave? Amadeo had known this conversation was coming, but he still wasn't ready for it. I didn't want to leave, he said carefully. The council made me go away for a little while. Why? Because. Amadeo struggled to find words a 3-year-old could understand. Because some people think that you and I care about each other too much. Lorenzo's brow furrowed. That's silly. You can't care too much. I agree, Amadeo said softly. But some people believe there are rules about who should love whom. And they think we're breaking those rules. Mama thinks that, Lorenzo said, and it wasn't a question. Amadeo's heart clenched. Your mama loves you very much, he said carefully. She's just worried. She wants to protect you. From you? Lorenzo asked, his dark eyes too knowing for his age. Amadeo couldn't lie. Yes, from me. Lorenzo considered this for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. Mama's scared. Scared? Amadeo repeated. Of what? That I love you more, Lorenzo said simply. She cries at night. I hear her. Amadeo felt his world tilt. In all his focus on Lorenzo, he'd forgotten that Serafina was suffering too. Not because she was cruel or political, but because she was a mother watching her son prefer someone else. And that pain was real, even if her methods of dealing with it had been destructive. "Do you love me more than your mama?" Amadeo asked gently. Lorenzo thought about it seriously. "Love different," he finally said. "Mama is mama. Deo is Deo." Out of the mouths of babes, Amadeo thought. A 3-year-old had just articulated what the entire pack couldn't seem to understand. That love wasn't a competition. That a child could love multiple people without diminishing his love for any of them. If only the adults could learn that lesson. The turning point came during the summer solstice festival. It was the biggest celebration of the year, when all the pack gathered to honor the longest day and the moon goddess's blessing. The heir was expected to attend, carried on a ceremonial platform by his parents, presented to the pack as the future of their bloodline. But Lorenzo refused to go unless Amadeo came with him. "The Omega cannot appear on the ceremonial platform," Serafina said tightly. "It violates protocol." "Then I'm not going," Lorenzo said, crossing his small arms. He'd recovered much of his strength and all of his stubbornness. Valentino looked between his son and his mate, exhaustion written across his face. "We could carry him separately," he suggested. "Let Amadeo walk beside the platform." "No," Serafina said flatly. "If we allow that, we're telling the entire pack that the heir needs his Omega Nanny present for official functions. Do you understand what that says about pack hierarchy?" "I understand," Valentino said coldly, "that our son nearly died because we tried to enforce pack hierarchy. Maybe it's time we questioned whether that hierarchy serves us or enslaves us." "Careful," Serafina warned. "You're starting to sound like a revolutionary." "Good," Valentino shot back. "Maybe this pack needs a revolution." They stared at each other, and Amadeo, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "Luna Serafina," he said softly. "May I make a suggestion?" Serafina turned to him, her silver eyes cold. "What?" "Let Lorenzo choose," Amadeo said. "Not between me and you. He shouldn't have to choose. But let him decide how he wants to appear at the festival. If he wants both of us there, find a way to make it work. And if he wants just you and the Alpha King, I'll stay behind without complaint." It was a gamble. If Lorenzo chose his parents, Amadeo would lose the symbolic battle. If Lorenzo chose Amadeo, Serafina would be publicly humiliated. But Lorenzo, brilliant child that he was, found the third option. "All three," he said firmly. "Mama, Papa and Deo. Family." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Family. Not servant and masters, but family. Serafina looked at her son, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his young face. He wasn't being manipulated. He wasn't confused. He simply loved both his mother and his Omega Nanny, and he wanted them both in his life. And Serafina had to decide. Was her pride worth more than her son's happiness? "Fine," she said finally, and the word sounded like it was ripped from her throat. "The Omega walks beside the platform. But he wears servant colors, not royal ones." "Agreed," Amadeo said immediately, bowing his head. Lorenzo beamed, clapping his small hands together. "All three. Like a real family." Valentino met Amadeo's eyes across the room, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or respect. The Alpha King nodded slightly. Acknowledgement that Amadeo had just won a significant victory without ever drawing a weapon. The summer solstice festival was magnificent. The entire pack gathered in the ceremonial grounds. Thousands of wolves in human form dressed in their finest clothes. The air smelled of roasted meat and honey wine, and children ran between the adults' legs, shrieking with laughter. When the royal family's procession began, a hush fell over the crowd. Valentino and Serafina walked side by side, carrying the ceremonial platform on which Lorenzo sat, dressed in miniature royal robes. He looked every inch the heir to the throne, regal, composed, perfect. And walking beside the platform, dressed in simple servant's brown but walking with quiet dignity, was Amadeo de Laurentiis. The whispers started immediately. Is that the Omega? The one from the forbidden bloodline? They're letting him walk in the royal procession. Look at the heir. He keeps looking at the Omega, not at the crowd. It was true. Lorenzo's attention was split between waving at the pack and checking to make sure Amadeo was still there. Every few seconds, the toddler would glance down, catch Amadeo's eye, and smile with such pure joy that it made Amadeo's heart ache. When they reached the ceremonial stage, Valentino and Serafina placed the platform in the center. Traditionally, this was when the parents would stand on either side of the heir and present him to the moon goddess. But Lorenzo had other plans. Deo up here too, Lorenzo announced, pointing at the stage. The crowd gasped. An Omega on the ceremonial stage was unheard of. Serafina's face went pale. This wasn't part of the agreement. Amadeo was supposed to stay beside the platform, not on it. But Valentino, in a move that shocked everyone, reached down and offered Amadeo his hand. Come up, the Alpha King said. If my son wants you here, you'll stand here. Amadeo looked at that offered hand. An Alpha King's hand, extended to an Omega from a forbidden bloodline, and understood the magnitude of what was happening. If he took that hand and stepped onto the stage, he wouldn't just be Lorenzo's nanny anymore. He'd be publicly acknowledged as part of the heir's inner circle. Family. The pack would never accept it. But Lorenzo needed him to be brave. Amadeo took Valentino's hand and stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Some wolves looked approving. Others looked scandalized. And Serafina looked like she wanted the earth to swallow her whole. But she didn't stop it. Because her son was smiling wider than she'd ever seen him smile. His small hand reaching out to grab Amadeo's sleeve, anchoring them together. Pack of the Northern Crescent, Valentino's voice rang out over the crowd, silencing the whispers. I present to you my son Lorenzo Massimo Bellator, heir to the throne. And I present to you those who keep him safe. His mother Luna Serafina, and his guardian Amadeo de Laurentiis, bound by blood oath to protect the heir until he comes of age. It was a political masterstroke. By framing Amadeo as Lorenzo's guardian rather than his nanny, Valentino had just elevated Amadeo's status without technically breaking any pack laws. A guardian could stand on the ceremonial stage. A guardian could walk in royal processions. A guardian was bound by sacred oath, not by servant status. The crowd processed this, and slowly, grudgingly, began to accept it. If the Alpha King said it was so, then it was law. But not everyone was happy. As the ceremony concluded and the pack dispersed for the feast, Amadeo noticed a group of elders watching him with cold, calculating eyes. He recognized Bianca among them, the sharp-eyed elder who'd voted for his separation from Lorenzo. This isn't over, Bianca said quietly as she passed him. The forbidden bloodline clause exists for a reason. And we haven't forgotten. It was a threat, and Amadeo felt a chill run down his spine. He'd won the battle, but the war was far from finished. That night, after Lorenzo was finally asleep and the palace had settled into quiet, Amadeo stood on the balcony of the nursery, looking out over the moonlit gardens. He heard the door open behind him and turned to find Serafina standing there, still in her ceremonial robes, looking exhausted and vulnerable in a way he'd never seen her before. I owe you an apology, she said without preamble. Amadeo blinked, stunned. Luna Serafina. Let me finish, she interrupted. I tried to destroy you. I used pack law and politics and every weapon at my disposal to remove you from my son's life. And I nearly killed him in the process. You were protecting him, Amadeo said carefully. Was I? Serafina's laugh was bitter. Or was I protecting my own ego, my own pride? The idea that I should be the center of my son's world. She walked to the balcony railing, standing beside Amadeo but not looking at him. I watched you with him today. The way he lights up when you smile. The way he trusts you completely. And I realized something terrible. What? Amadeo asked softly. You're a better mother to him than I am, Serafina whispered. Not because you're Omega or because of any bond, but because you actually see him. You pay attention to what he needs, not what pack law says he should need. You love him for who he is, not who he'll become. Amadeo felt tears prick his eyes. Luna Serafina, you're his mother. Nothing can change that. He needs you. Does he? Serafina's voice cracked. Or does he just tolerate me because pack hierarchy says he has to? He loves you, Amadeo said firmly. He told me so himself. You're his mama. But he's scared that you'll make him choose between you and me. Children shouldn't have to make choices like that. Serafina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I don't know how to share him. I don't know how to be the Luna and the mother and still make room for you in his heart. Then maybe, Amadeo suggested gently, we figure it out together. Not as rivals, but as two people who both love the same little boy. Serafina finally turned to look at him, really look at him, and saw not a threat but an ally. Someone who wanted the same thing she did. Lorenzo's happiness. I can't promise I'll be good at this, she warned. I'm still the Luna. I still believe in pack hierarchy. And there will be times when I resent you terribly. I can live with that, Amadeo said. As long as Lorenzo is safe and loved. Serafina held out her hand, and Amadeo took it. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a truce. Beginning. For Lorenzo, Serafina said. For Lorenzo, Amadeo agreed. The next 3 months passed in relative peace. Serafina made an effort to spend more time with Lorenzo, and to her surprise, it became easier when she stopped competing with Amadeo. The three of them developed a routine. Amadeo handled mornings and bedtime. Serafina took Lorenzo for walks in the garden and taught him about pack history, and Valentino joined them for dinners when his duties allowed. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, still times when Serafina felt the old jealousy rising. But she was learning to manage it, learning to see Amadeo as an asset rather than a threat. Lorenzo thrived. He grew stronger, more confident, more joyful. And he learned, through their example, that love didn't have to be exclusive. That he could have both his mama and his Deo without betraying either of them. The pack watched this unusual arrangement with mixed feelings. Some approved of the Alpha King's progressive thinking. Others muttered darkly about tradition and hierarchy being eroded. And the Council of Elders watched Amadeo with increasing suspicion. Because Amadeo had done something unforgivable. He'd proven that an Omega from a forbidden bloodline could influence the royal family. Not through manipulation, but through genuine love and devotion. And that was more dangerous than any political plot. If one Omega could rise above his station through merit rather than submission, what did that mean for the entire pack hierarchy? The elders met in secret, and they began to plan. The attack came on a crisp autumn morning. Lorenzo was playing in the garden, chasing butterflies while Amadeo watched from a nearby bench. Serafina was in meetings with the council. Valentino was inspecting the border patrols. It should have been an ordinary day. Then 3 wolves in elder robes emerged from the tree line. Amadeo stood immediately, placing himself between Lorenzo and the strangers. The garden is closed to visitors, he said firmly. State your business. Bianca stepped forward, her sharp eyes cold. We're here for the Omega. The council has voted. You're to be removed from the palace immediately. That's impossible, Amadeo said, keeping his voice calm despite his racing heart. The blood oath has been overridden by a unanimous council vote, another elder said. The Luna may have made her peace with you, but we haven't. You're a danger to the pack's stability. Deo! Lorenzo's small voice came from behind him. What's happening? Nothing, little prince, Amadeo said softly, not taking his eyes off the elders. Go find your mother. The child stays, Bianca said. He needs to see this. He needs to understand that Omegas like you don't belong in royal circles. It was a power play, and Amadeo understood it immediately. They wanted to take him in front of Lorenzo, to traumatize the child and break the bond through force and humiliation. You won't touch him, Amadeo said, and his eyes flashed gold, the first time he'd ever shown the Omega power he'd inherited from his forbidden bloodline. The elders stepped back, shocked. He's using magic, one of them gasped. The old powers. He is manipulating the air. I'm protecting him, Amadeo snarled, and he felt the power rising in him, ancient and terrible and utterly beyond his control. And I won't let you use him as a pawn in your political games. Amadeo. Serafina's voice cut through the confrontation like a blade. She stood at the garden entrance, flanked by palace guards, her silver eyes blazing with fury. Stand down, she commanded the elders. All of you. Now. Luna Serafina, Bianca said stiffly. The council has voted. I don't care what the council voted, Serafina interrupted coldly. You do not approach the heir without my permission. You do not threaten his guardian in front of him. And you certainly don't use your positions to terrorize a 3-year-old child. Guards, escort these elders to the council chamber. The Alpha King will deal with them personally. The guards moved forward, and the elders had no choice but to retreat. But Bianca turned back one last time, her gaze locked on Amadeo. This isn't over, De Laurentiis. Your kind will never be accepted here. And eventually you'll slip up. You'll show your true nature. And when you do, we'll be waiting. Then she was gone, and Amadeo collapsed to his knees, the power draining out of him as quickly as it had come. Lorenzo ran to him immediately, throwing his small arms around Amadeo's neck. Don't leave, Deo. Please don't leave. I'm not going anywhere, Amadeo promised, but the words felt hollow now. Because he'd revealed his Omega power in front of witnesses. He'd shown them exactly what they feared, that the De Laurentiis bloodline still carried magic. And magic, in a pack built on hierarchy and submission, was the most dangerous thing of all. The emergency council meeting that evening was explosive. Valentino stood at the head of the table, his alpha presence filling the room with suppressed fury. You violated direct orders from the Luna, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You approached the heir without permission and attempted to remove his guardian by force. Explain yourselves. We were protecting the pack, Bianca said, not backing down despite the Alpha King's obvious rage. That Omega used magic today. Old magic. The kind that nearly destroyed this pack 3 generations ago. He was protecting my son from your intimidation, Serafina said coldly. She sat at Valentino's right hand, and for the first time in months, they were completely united. Lorenzo was terrified. Of course, Amadeo's protective instincts kicked in. Protective instincts don't make your eyes glow gold, another elder argued. That was power. Omega manipulation. Exactly what we've been warning about. Then let me ask you something, Valentino said, leaning forward. If Amadeo truly wanted to use his power to manipulate us, why hasn't he done it before? He's been in the palace for over a year. He's had countless opportunities to influence me, my mate, the entire pack. And yet all he's done is care for our son. Why? The elders had no answer for that. I'll tell you why, Valentino continued. Because he's not interested in power. He's not plotting revenge for his family. He's just an Omega trying to survive in a pack that's determined to punish him for crimes he never committed. The forbidden bloodline clause exists for a reason, Bianca insisted. And what reason is that? Serafina challenged. Fear. Paranoia. The need to have someone to blame when things go wrong. My son nearly died because we enforced that clause. I won't let it happen again. With respect, Luna Serafina, Bianca said, her voice hard. You don't have the authority to override council decisions. Not on this. No, Valentino said quietly. But I do. The room went silent. As Alpha King, Valentino continued, I hereby abolish the forbidden bloodline clause. Effective immediately. No pack member will be punished or restricted based on their family history. We judge wolves by their actions, not their ancestry. The elders erupted in protest, but Valentino's alpha command silenced them instantly. "This is not a negotiation," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This is law. Amadeo de Laurentiis is under my protection as guardian to the heir. Any attempt to harm him or remove him will be considered an act of treason against the throne. Are we clear?" Reluctantly, the elders bowed their heads in submission. But Amadeo, watching from his position against the wall, knew this wasn't victory. It was escalation. The elders wouldn't give up, they'd just get more creative. And he was right. 2 weeks later, Lorenzo got sick. It started as a simple cold, nothing serious, just a slight fever and a cough. But within 48 hours, it had turned into something far worse. Lorenzo couldn't keep food down. His fever spiked to dangerous levels. The healers worked around the clock, but nothing seemed to help. And then, on the third day, one of the healers made a disturbing discovery. "Luna Serafina," the head healer said quietly, her face grave. "The heir has been poisoned." The world stopped. "Poisoned?" Serafina repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "How? When?" "The poison was in his food," the healer explained. "A slow-acting toxin that builds up over time. He's been ingesting small amounts for at least a week." Valentino's face went white with rage. Who had access to his food? The answer was obvious to everyone in the room. Amadeo. As Lorenzo's guardian, Amadeo oversaw the preparation of all the heir's meals. He tasted the food first to check for poison, a standard protocol for royal children. If anyone could have poisoned Lorenzo without detection, it was Amadeo. "It wasn't him," Serafina said immediately. "Amadeo would never hurt Lorenzo." "Then how do you explain the poison?" Bianca had appeared at the door, flanked by other elders. "The Omega is the only one with constant access to the heir's food. And we all saw him use old magic 2 weeks ago. Perhaps he's been manipulating Lorenzo all along, planning to eliminate him and claim the throne for himself." "That's insane," Valentino snarled. "Amadeo has no claim to the throne." "But his family did," Bianca countered. 3 generations ago, the De Laurentiis line challenged for the crown. They failed, but the bloodline carries memory. Maybe Amadeo is finishing what his ancestors started. It was a perfect frame. Too perfect. Amadeo stood in the corner of the room, watching Lorenzo struggle to breathe, and understood with crystal clarity what had happened. The elders had poisoned Lorenzo themselves and set up Amadeo to take the blame. It was elegant, brutal, and nearly impossible to prove. "Arrest the Omega," Bianca commanded the guards. "He's attempted murder of the heir to the throne. The sentence is death." "No." Serafina moved to stand in front of Amadeo. "I won't allow it. Not without proof." "The poison in the heir's food is proof enough," Bianca said coldly. "Then arrest me too," Serafina said, her voice ringing with authority. "Because I also taste Lorenzo's food before he eats it. If Amadeo is guilty, so am I." The elders hadn't expected that. Arresting the Luna was unthinkable. "And me," Valentino added, moving to stand beside his mate. "I oversee the kitchen staff. I approve the menu. If the poison came through the food, then I'm as responsible as anyone." The royal family stood together, protecting Amadeo with their own bodies, and the elders realized they'd made a critical miscalculation. They'd thought isolating Amadeo would be easy, but the bond between him and the royal family was stronger than they'd anticipated. "This is ridiculous," Bianca said. "The Omega is clearly guilty." "Then prove it," Valentino challenged. "Show me evidence that Amadeo administered the poison." "Not speculation. Not family history. Actual evidence." Bianca couldn't, because she'd been too clever. The poison had been administered by a kitchen worker who was loyal to the elders, but that worker had since disappeared to avoid questioning. There was no trail leading back to the elders, but there was also no trail leading to Amadeo. "Fine," Bianca said finally. The Omega will remain under house arrest while we investigate. But if we find even a shred of evidence against him, he hangs. Blood oath or not. It was the best deal they were going to get. As the guards escorted Amadeo to his chambers, he looked back at Lorenzo, lying pale and still in his bed, and made a silent vow. He would find out who did this. He would clear his name. And he would make sure the people responsible paid for hurting the child he loved. Even if it meant revealing the full extent of his forbidden power. But the truth was Lorenzo was dying. The healers couldn't identify the poison, couldn't find an antidote. And with each passing hour, Lorenzo slipped further away. By the 5th day, the heir to the Northern Crescent throne had lapsed into a coma. Serafina and Valentino took shifts sitting with him, holding his small hand, begging him to fight. But Lorenzo didn't respond. He just lay there, his breathing growing shallower, his heartbeat weaker. And Amadeo, locked in his chambers under guard, could hear Serafina's screams of grief echoing through the palace. On the 6th day, Amadeo made a decision. He called for Marco, the guard who'd shown him kindness before. "I need to see Lorenzo," Amadeo said. "One last time." "You're under house arrest," Marco said quietly. "I can't let you out." "Then I'm not asking for permission," Amadeo said, and his eyes flashed gold. The Omega power rose in him, stronger than before, fueled by desperation and love. He felt it flow through him like liquid light, ancient and terrible and completely beyond pack law. Marco stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you?" "I'm what my bloodline was always meant to be," Amadeo said. "A healer." That was the secret the pack had tried to bury. The De Laurentiis line hadn't been warriors who challenged for the throne through force. They'd been healers, Omegas who carried the moon goddess's gift for curing any ailment. And the pack had destroyed them because healers had power, the power to decide who lived and who died. 3 generations ago, Amadeo's ancestors had refused to heal the Alpha King's mate when she fell ill, demanding political reforms in exchange for their aid. The Alpha King had executed them for treason, and their healing gift was declared forbidden. But genetic memory runs deep. And Amadeo had inherited every drop of that ancient power. He walked past Marco, who couldn't bring himself to stop him, and made his way to Lorenzo's chambers. The guards at the door tried to block him, but one look at Amadeo's glowing eyes and they stepped aside. Inside, Serafina and Valentino sat on either side of Lorenzo's bed, holding vigil. They looked up when Amadeo entered, too exhausted to even be angry. "He's dying," Serafina whispered. "The healers say he has hours, maybe less." "I can save him," Amadeo said. Valentino's eyes widened. "How?" "The same way my family saved hundreds of wolves before the pack destroyed them," Amadeo said. "I can heal him. But there's a cost." "Name it," Serafina said immediately. "Anything. I'll have to use the forbidden power," Amadeo said. "And once I do, the entire pack will know what I am. The elders will never stop hunting me. I'll be putting a target on my back forever." "Do it," Valentino said without hesitation. "Save my son. We'll deal with the consequences later." Amadeo approached the bed and placed his hands on Lorenzo's chest. He closed his eyes and let the power flow, feeling it surge through his body and into the child. It was agonizing. Healing magic required the healer to absorb the illness into themselves, process it, neutralize it, and then expel it. Amadeo felt the poison enter his system, felt it burning through his veins like acid. He tasted blood in his mouth. His vision went dark. But he didn't stop. He pushed through the pain, drawing more poison out of Lorenzo's small body and into his own. He could feel his organs shutting down, his heart struggling to keep beating. This was what healing cost, a life for a life, pain for pain. "Amadeo!" Serafina's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "You're bleeding." Blood was trickling from Amadeo's nose, his ears, his eyes. His body couldn't process the poison fast enough. He was dying to save Lorenzo. And he didn't care. With one final surge of power, Amadeo expelled the last of the poison from Lorenzo's body. The child gasped, his eyes flying open, color returning to his cheeks. "Deo!" Lorenzo whispered, seeing Amadeo's glowing hands on his chest. Then Amadeo collapsed. He woke up 3 days later in the palace infirmary. His body ached like he'd been torn apart and put back together wrong. Every breath was agony, but he was alive barely. "You're awake," a soft voice said. Serafina sat beside his bed, looking like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank the moon goddess." "Lorenzo." Amadeo's voice came out as a rasp. "He's fine," Serafina said, tears streaming down her face. "Completely healed. Like the poisoning never happened. You saved him, Amadeo. You traded your life for his. Worth it," Amadeo managed. "No," Serafina said fiercely. "It wasn't. Because now the entire pack knows what you can do. And they're terrified." Amadeo's heart sank. He'd known this would happen, but knowing and experiencing were different things. "The elders are calling for your immediate execution," Serafina continued. "They're saying you're too dangerous to live. That healing power is just another form of manipulation. That you'll use it to control the pack." "They poisoned Lorenzo," Amadeo said, each word an effort. "To frame me. To give them an excuse to kill me." "We know," Valentino said, entering the infirmary. The kitchen worker confessed before he left the pack. "We have evidence of the elders' involvement. But it doesn't matter. They're using pack fear of the old powers to demand your death anyway. So I die either way," Amadeo said flatly. "Not if I can help it," Valentino said. "I'm calling for a trial by council, a formal hearing where both sides present their case. If we can prove that you're not a threat, that your power is a gift rather than a danger, we might be able to save you." "Might," Amadeo repeated. "The elders have the majority vote," Valentino admitted. "But I'm hoping we can sway enough younger pack members to our side. Change takes time, but it has to start somewhere." Amadeo closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. He'd saved Lorenzo. That was all that mattered. If the pack decided he had to die for it, at least he'd die knowing the child he loved was safe. But then a small hand touched his arm. "Deo!" Amadeo's eyes flew open. Lorenzo stood beside the bed, having somehow snuck past the guards. His dark eyes were wide with worry. "You're not going away again, are you?" Lorenzo asked, his voice trembling. And Amadeo realized something crucial. If he gave up now, if he accepted death, he'd be abandoning Lorenzo again, breaking his promise, proving that the elders were right, that an Omega from a forbidden bloodline couldn't be trusted. "No," Amadeo said, gathering his strength. "I'm not going anywhere, little prince. I'm going to fight. For you. For every wolf who's been punished for the bloodline they were born into." Lorenzo's face broke into a smile, and he climbed onto the bed, carefully avoiding Amadeo's injuries, and curled up against his side. Serafina moved to pull Lorenzo away, then stopped herself. This was what her son needed. And maybe, just maybe, it was what she needed to see. The proof that love could survive even the pack's harshest judgments. "The trial is in 3 days," Valentino said quietly. "Rest. And prepare to fight for your life." The trial by council was held in the Great Hall, with the entire pack in attendance. Amadeo stood in the center of the hall, still weak from the healing but determined to face his accusers. Lorenzo sat on his throne between his parents, watching everything with solemn eyes far too old for his age. Bianca rose to present the case against Amadeo. "This Omega," she said, her voice carrying across the hall, "has admitted to possessing forbidden power, healing magic, the same power his ancestors used to manipulate pack politics and threaten the throne. He's demonstrated this power publicly, showing that he's willing to use it despite the ancient laws forbidding it. And most damning of all, he's formed an unnatural attachment to the heir, An attachment that gives him dangerous influence over the future of our pack. The crowd murmured in agreement. Fear of the old powers ran deep. What proof do you have, Valentino challenged, that Amadeo has used his power to manipulate anyone? He saved my son's life. That's not manipulation, that's devotion. He absorbed poison that should have killed him, Bianca countered. That level of power is dangerous. What's to stop him from using it to harm the pack instead of help it? His character, Serafina said, standing. I've spent months watching Amadeo with my son. I've seen his kindness, his patience, his selflessness. I've also seen my own jealousy and pride nearly destroy my child. If anyone here should be on trial, it's me, for allowing pack politics to blind me to what truly matters. The crowd went silent. The Luna admitting fault was unprecedented. Amadeo has never asked for anything, Serafina continued. Not status, not wealth, not recognition. All he's ever wanted is to care for Lorenzo. And he's proven his loyalty by being willing to die for my son. Can any of you say the same? It was a powerful argument, but the elders weren't swayed. Loyalty can be feigned, another elder said. Especially by Omegas with manipulation powers. We cannot risk the heir's safety based on sentiment. Then let me speak, a small voice said. Everyone turned. Lorenzo had stood up from his throne. His child's voice carrying surprising authority. I'm the heir, Lorenzo said carefully, clearly repeating words someone had taught him. And I say Deo stays. He's my family. And family protects family. The crowd was clearly moved by the child's innocence, but Bianca wasn't finished. The heir is 3 years old, she said dismissively. He doesn't understand the implications of. I understand that Deo saved my life, Lorenzo interrupted. His voice stronger now. I understand that everyone wanted him gone and he came back anyway. I understand that he's the only one who makes the bad dreams stop. That's what I understand. Out of the mouths of babes, Amadeo thought again. Lorenzo had just articulated the emotional truth that everyone was trying to bury under politics and fear. Valentino stood. His alpha presence commanding attention. We're going to vote, he said. And this vote will determine the kind of pack we want to be. Do we want to be a pack ruled by fear of the past? Or do we want to be a pack that judges wolves by their actions, not their bloodline? All in favor of allowing Amadeo de Laurentiis to remain as guardian to the heir, raise your hand. Hands rose slowly. First the younger wolves, the ones who'd seen Amadeo's devotion to Lorenzo. Then some of the guards who'd watched him over the months. Then, surprisingly, a few of the older wolves who remembered what the pack had been like when healers walked among them. But it wasn't enough. The vote was split almost evenly, with the elders holding the tiebreaker. The vote is tied, Dante announced. As head elder, I cast the deciding vote. And I vote. The entire hall held its breath. To allow the Omega to remain. Shock rippled through the crowd. Dante had been expected to side with Bianca and the conservative elders. Why? Bianca demanded, furious at the betrayal. Dante looked at Lorenzo, then at Amadeo, then back at the assembled pack. Because I'm old enough to remember what we lost when we destroyed the healers. We lost the wolves who could cure any disease, heal any wound, bring anyone back from the brink of death. We chose power over compassion, and the pack has been weaker for it ever since. He turned to Amadeo. You're not your ancestors, boy. You're not seeking power or revenge. You're just trying to love a child who needs you. And if that's forbidden, then maybe it's time we changed what we forbid. The decision was made. Amadeo could stay. But as the crowd dispersed and Amadeo stood there shaking with relief and residual fear, he saw Bianca's face. She looked at him with pure hatred, and Amadeo knew this wasn't over. She would find another way. And next time she'd make sure there was no trial, no vote, no chance for mercy. That night, Lorenzo refused to sleep in his own chambers. Want to sleep with Deo? He insisted, clinging to Amadeo's hand. Serafina and Valentino exchanged glances. This was another breach of protocol, the heir sleeping in the servants' quarters. But after everything that had happened, protocol seemed less important than Lorenzo's peace of mind. Just for tonight, Serafina agreed. So Amadeo carried Lorenzo to his small room, tucked him into the narrow bed, and lay down beside him. The toddler immediately curled against Amadeo's chest, his breathing evening out almost instantly. "Deo!" Lorenzo whispered in the darkness. "Yes, little prince. Why do people want you to go away?" Amadeo struggled to find an age-appropriate answer. "Because I'm different. And sometimes people are scared of different." "That's silly," Lorenzo said, his child's logic cutting through centuries of pack politics. "Different is good. Mama says that's what makes the pack strong." Amadeo smiled sadly. "Your mama is very wise. Are you still scared?" Lorenzo asked. The honest answer was yes. Amadeo was terrified. The trial might be over, but the threat remained. Every day he stayed in the palace was another day the elders could plot against him. Every night could be his last. But Lorenzo didn't need to carry that fear. "I'm not scared when I'm with you," Amadeo said instead. "You make me brave." Lorenzo giggled, pleased by this. "I make you brave and you make the bad dreams go away. We're a good team." "The best team," Amadeo agreed, pressing a kiss to Lorenzo's dark curls. As Lorenzo drifted off to sleep, Amadeo stared at the ceiling and wondered how long this fragile peace could last. The elders would regroup. They'd find new ways to attack him, new laws to invoke, new dangers to manufacture. But for tonight, Lorenzo was safe and happy and sleeping soundly against Amadeo's heart. And that would have to be enough. The final blow came 6 months later, during the winter solstice. Lorenzo was 4 now, growing taller and smarter every day. He'd started basic schooling, learning letters and numbers and pack history. And he insisted that Amadeo attend every lesson with him, translating the complicated concepts into stories that Lorenzo could understand. The bond between them had only grown stronger. Lorenzo called Amadeo Dio Papa now, a nickname that made Serafina wince but she'd learned not to correct. And Amadeo had become a fixture in the royal household, respected by most of the pack even if the elders still watched him with suspicion. Things were good, almost peaceful. And then Bianca made her final move. "Alpha King," she said during a routine council meeting, her voice carefully neutral. "I have troubling news. There's been a challenge to your throne." Valentino's expression darkened. "From whom?" "The Western Pack," Bianca said. "They claim that by allowing a forbidden bloodline Omega to influence the heir, you violated the ancient compact between packs. They're threatening war unless Amadeo is removed." It was brilliant. The Western Pack was the largest neighboring territory, and their alpha was known for his conservative views. Whether they'd actually threatened war or Bianca had manufactured the threat was unclear, but it didn't matter. The possibility of war was enough to force Valentino's hand. "They're bluffing," Valentino said flatly. "Are you willing to bet the pack's safety on that?" Bianca challenged. "One Omega, Alpha King. One Omega's life, weighed against potential war. Is that really a difficult choice?" Serafina stood, her silver eyes blazing. "This is manipulation. You're using the Western Pack as an excuse to finally get rid of Amadeo. Whether it's an excuse or a legitimate threat is irrelevant," another elder said. "The fact remains, we must choose between the Omega and the Pack's safety." Valentino looked around the council chamber, seeing the fear and uncertainty on every face. Even the wolves who'd voted to let Amadeo stay were wavering now. "We're changed everything." "I need time," Valentino said. "Let me speak with the Western Alpha directly. Confirm the threat." "You have 3 days," Bianca said. "Then the council votes on whether to banish the Omega permanently. No blood oath, no trial, no appeals. He goes or we go to war." Valentino's conversation with the Western Alpha confirmed Amadeo's worst fears. The threat was real. The Western pack had been watching the Northern Crescent's experiments with pack hierarchy, and they didn't like what they saw. If word spread that Omegas could rise above their station, could use forbidden powers without consequence, could influence future alphas, it would destabilize every pack in the region. "Send away the Omega," the Western Alpha said bluntly. "Or we consider it an act of war." Valentino returned to the palace with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He called Amadeo to his study, and one look at the Alpha King's face told Amadeo everything he needed to know. "You have to leave," Valentino said, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm so sorry, Amadeo. I tried everything. But I can't risk war. I can't risk the pack's survival for one wolf, no matter how much he means to my family." Amadeo had known this day would come, had felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. "When?" he asked quietly. "Tomorrow at dawn. The elders want you gone before Lorenzo wakes up. They think it will be easier for him if you just disappear." "Easier for them maybe," Amadeo said bitterly. "Not for Lorenzo. He'll think I abandoned him again." "I'll explain it to him," Valentino promised. "When he's older. I'll make sure he knows you didn't choose to leave." "Will you?" Amadeo challenged. "Or will he grow up thinking that everyone he loves eventually abandons him? That attachment is dangerous because people always leave." Valentino flinched. "What choice do I have?" "You always have a choice," Amadeo said. "You're just choosing the pack over my son. Again." "He's not your son," Valentino said, but the words lacked conviction. "Isn't he?" Amadeo asked. "I've raised him, loved him, protected him, almost died for him. What makes a father, Alpha King? Blood. Or the willingness to sacrifice everything for your child's happiness?" Valentino had no answer for that. Amadeo stood, straightening his shoulders despite the grief threatening to crush him. "I'll go. But I want one thing in return." "Name it. Let me say goodbye. Let me tell Lorenzo myself why I have to leave. Don't make me disappear like a ghost." Valentino considered this, then shook his head. "The elders specifically forbid it. They think you'll use your Omega powers to manipulate him into causing a scene." "I see," Amadeo said softly. "So after everything, after proving my loyalty, my love, my devotion, they still think I'm a manipulator. They still think I'm the villain of this story. They're afraid," Valentino said. "Fear makes people cruel." "No," Amadeo said, heading for the door. "Cowardice makes people cruel. Fear is just the excuse." He left the study and made his way back to the nursery, where Lorenzo was playing with his wooden wolves. The child looked up and smiled, that brilliant smile that had kept Amadeo going through every trial and betrayal. "Deo. Play. I'm making the wolves have a battle, but then they make friends at the end because Mama says that's better than fighting." Amadeo knelt beside Lorenzo, committing every detail to memory. The way Lorenzo's nose crinkled when he laughed. The soft curl of his hair against his forehead. The absolute trust in his dark eyes. "Lorenzo," Amadeo said gently, "I need to tell you something important." "Okay," Lorenzo said, still focused on his wolves. "I have to go away for a while." Lorenzo's hands stilled. He looked up at Amadeo, confusion clouding his face. "How long?" Amadeo's throat tightened. "How do you tell a 4-year-old that you're leaving forever?" "I don't know, little prince. Maybe a long time. But you'll come back," Lorenzo said, and it wasn't a question. It was absolute certainty. "You always come back. You promised." "Lorenzo. You promised, Deo." Lorenzo's voice rose, panic beginning to set in. "You said you'd always come back. You said you'd never leave me. You promised." Amadeo pulled Lorenzo into his arms as the child started crying, those heartbroken sobs that Amadeo had heard too many times before. "I'm so sorry," Amadeo whispered into Lorenzo's hair. "I'm so sorry." "Don't go," Lorenzo begged, his small hands fisting in Amadeo's shirt. Please, Deo. I'll be good. I'll be so good. Just don't go. And that was the moment Serafina entered the nursery. She stood in the doorway, watching her son cry, listening to his desperate pleas, and something inside her finally broke. Not her pride this time, something deeper. The part of her that was a mother before she was a Luna. The part that knew, with absolute certainty, that what was happening in this moment was wrong. No, Serafina said quietly. Amadeo looked up at her, tears streaming down his own face. Luna Serafina. No, she said again, louder this time. I won't allow this. Not again. I won't watch my son's heart break for the third time because adults can't figure out how to love properly. She walked to where Amadeo and Lorenzo sat, and she knelt beside them. Lorenzo, she said gently, look at Mama. Lorenzo turned his tear-stained face toward her. Deo is not leaving, Serafina said firmly. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. I promise you that. But the council, Amadeo started. Can answer to me, Serafina finished. I'm tired of being the Luna who chooses politics over love. I'm tired of being the mother who loses her son to her own pride. So here's what's going to happen. You're staying. And if the Western Pack wants war, they can have it. Because I'm done sacrificing the people my son loves to make other wolves comfortable. Valentino appeared behind her, and for a moment Amadeo thought he'd come to override his mate's decision. But then the Alpha King smiled, a fierce, proud smile. My Luna has spoken, Valentino said. And I stand with her. Amadeo stays. Let the Western Pack try their luck. But the council, Amadeo tried again. Will do what their Alpha King and Luna command, Valentino said firmly. We've been making decisions out of fear for too long. It's time we made a decision out of love. Lorenzo, who'd been watching this exchange with wide eyes, suddenly threw his arms around Serafina's neck. Thank you, Mama, he sobbed. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Serafina, holding her son while he thanked her for keeping the Omega she'd once despised, finally understood what Amadeo had been trying to tell her all along. Love wasn't a competition. It was a collaboration. And Lorenzo had enough heart to love them both, if they could just set aside their pride long enough to let him. The confrontation with the council the next morning was explosive. You're risking war for an Omega, Bianca said incredulously. Have you both lost your minds? No, Serafina said calmly. We've finally found them. Amadeo is family. And we don't sacrifice family for politics. Family. Bianca spat the word. He's a servant. He's Lorenzo's guardian, bound by blood oath, Valentino corrected. And more than that, he's the wolf who's kept our son alive and happy through every crisis we've thrown at him. That makes him family in my eyes. The Western Pack can negotiate, Valentino interrupted. Or they can try to fight us. Either way, I'm done letting outside threats dictate how I run my own pack. If they want to challenge my authority, let them try. It was a massive gamble. The Western Pack was larger, better armed, and had been looking for an excuse to expand their territory. But Valentino was betting that they wouldn't actually want a war, that the threat had been a bluff designed to make the Northern Crescent fold. He was right. When word reached the Western Alpha that the Northern Crescent wouldn't back down, that they were willing to go to war to protect one Omega, the Western Pack backed off. Not because they suddenly respected Amadeo, but because they realized that a pack united enough to fight for its principles was a pack they didn't want to face in battle. The threat dissolved like morning mist. And Amadeo, who'd been prepared to leave everything behind to save the pack he loved, was allowed to stay. But things had changed. Fundamentally, irrevocably changed. The Northern Crescent Pack had just sent a message to every other pack in the region. We judge wolves by their character, not their bloodline. We choose love over fear. We protect our own, even when it's inconvenient. It was revolutionary. And it wouldn't be easy. But as Amadeo watched Lorenzo play in the garden, laughing and carefree for the first time in months, he thought maybe, just maybe, it was worth the fight. 5 years later, Lorenzo was 9 years old and asking questions. Deo, he said one evening as Amadeo helped him with his studies. "Why do some wolves say you're not supposed to be here?" Amadeo had known this conversation would come eventually. Lorenzo was old enough now to understand pack politics, to hear the whispers that followed Amadeo through the halls. "Because I'm different," Amadeo explained. "My family did some things a long time ago that made other wolves angry. And some people think I should be punished for what my ancestors did." "That's stupid," Lorenzo said bluntly. "You can't help who your family is." "No," Amadeo agreed. "You can't. But sometimes people need someone to blame for their fears. And it's easier to blame someone for their bloodline than to admit that the world is complicated and scary." Lorenzo considered this seriously. He was a thoughtful child, made wise beyond his years by the conflicts that had swirled around him since he was a toddler. "When I'm alpha," Lorenzo said carefully, "I'm going to change the laws. Make it so nobody gets punished for their family. Make it so wolves like you don't have to be scared all the time." Amadeo's heart swelled with pride and sorrow. "That's a beautiful goal, little prince. But changing laws is hard. People resist change." "Then I'll make them understand," Lorenzo said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "I'll show them that family isn't just about blood. It's about who loves you and who you love back. Like you and me and Mama and Papa. We're family, even though you're not my blood." "Right. Right," Amadeo whispered, overwhelmed by this child's capacity for love and understanding. Lorenzo went back to his studies and Amadeo sat there, watching him, thinking about how far they'd come. From that first night when a grieving toddler had called for his Omega nanny, to this moment where a young heir was planning to reshape pack law. It hadn't been easy. There had been 3 more attempts by the elders to remove Amadeo, each one defeated by the united front of Valentino, Serafina, and a growing number of younger pack members who believed in judging wolves by their actions rather than their bloodlines. Bianca had eventually retired from the council, her influence broken by her repeated failures to remove Amadeo. The other conservative elders had gradually been replaced by more progressive voices. Change was happening, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. And at the center of it all was Lorenzo, the heir who refused to let pack politics dictate who he loved, who believed, with the fierce certainty of youth, that love was stronger than fear. "Deo," Lorenzo said, interrupting Amadeo's thoughts. "Yes. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you kept coming back, even when people tried to make you leave." "Me too, little prince," Amadeo said softly. "Me too." Epilogue. 10 years later, on the day of Lorenzo's coronation as Alpha King, Amadeo stood in the crowd, watching the young man he'd helped raise take his oath. Lorenzo was 19 now, tall and strong and confident in a way that reminded Amadeo of Valentino, but with Serafina's sharp mind and compassionate heart. And he was about to become the youngest Alpha King in pack history. "I, Lorenzo Massimo Bellator," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying across the assembled pack, "swear to lead with wisdom, justice and compassion, to judge wolves by their character, not their bloodline, to protect the vulnerable, challenge the unjust, and build a pack where every wolf, regardless of rank or family, has the opportunity to thrive." It was a radical oath. Traditional coronation vows focused on strength, dominance, protecting pack hierarchy. But Lorenzo had insisted on writing his own vows, and neither Valentino nor Serafina had tried to stop him. This was the Alpha King they'd raised together, all 3 of them in their complicated, unconventional way. After the ceremony, Lorenzo found Amadeo in the crowd. "You came," Lorenzo said, grinning. "I wouldn't miss it," Amadeo replied. "Even though you specifically didn't need me to." "I always need you," Lorenzo interrupted gently. "You know that." He pulled something from his robes, a scroll with an official seal. "My first act as Alpha King," Lorenzo said, handing the scroll to Amadeo, "is to formally abolish the forbidden bloodline clause and all associated restrictions, and to grant full restoration of rank and privilege to the De Laurentiis family line." Amadeo stared at the scroll, not quite believing what he was reading. "You're a lord now," Lorenzo said, his eyes twinkling. Lord Amadeo de Laurentiis, first guardian to the crown. With all the rights and responsibilities that come with that title. Lorenzo, I don't need. I know you don't, Lorenzo said. You've never needed status or recognition. But I need the pack to understand that what you did, raising me, protecting me, loving me when it was forbidden, that deserves honor. Not punishment. Honor. Amadeo felt tears prick his eyes. You didn't have to do this. Yes, Lorenzo said firmly. I did. Because you taught me that love is stronger than law. And now I'm going to spend my reign proving it. He pulled Amadeo into a hug, and for a moment they were just Deo and Lorenzo again. The Omega nanny and the toddler who'd refused to let him go, who'd called him back night after night until the pack had no choice but to accept their bond. Thank you, Lorenzo whispered. For everything. For never giving up on me. For teaching me that family is what we make it. Thank you, Amadeo whispered back. For teaching me that love is worth fighting for. They pulled apart, and Lorenzo turned back to his coronation celebration, ready to begin his reign. And Amadeo stood there, holding the scroll that restored his family's honor, thinking about that first night when a terrified Omega had heard a toddler's cries and made a choice to comfort him despite the risk. One choice. One act of love in defiance of pack law. And it had changed everything. Final scene. That night, after the celebrations had died down, Lorenzo found Amadeo on the palace balcony, looking out over the moonlit grounds. Can't sleep? Lorenzo asked, joining him. Just thinking, Amadeo said. About how improbable all of this is. A few years ago, I was a forbidden Omega working as a nanny, barely surviving. And now? Now you're Lord de Laurentiis, first guardian to the crown, and one of the most respected wolves in the pack, Lorenzo finished. Not so improbable when you think about it. You earned every bit of that respect. Did I? Amadeo asked. Or did I just love someone who happened to become important? You loved someone when the entire pack said you shouldn't, Lorenzo corrected. You fought for that love even when it cost you everything. That's what earned you respect. The fact that I became Alpha King is just a bonus. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Lorenzo said something that had been on his mind for years. You know, he said carefully, you could still find a mate. Start your own family. You don't have to spend your whole life taking care of me. Amadeo smiled. But I like taking care of you. And besides, who says I don't have a family? Have you? I have your parents. I have the pack that finally learned to accept me. That's more family than most wolves ever get. Still, Lorenzo pressed, don't you want your own pup someday? Someone to raise the way you raised me. Amadeo looked at the young Alpha King. His little prince, grown tall and strong and wise, and felt nothing but contentment. I already raised my pup, he said softly. And he turned out pretty well if I do say so myself. Lorenzo's eyes went suspiciously bright. Deo. I mean it, Amadeo said. You were the child of my heart, Lorenzo. Blood or not, you were mine to love and protect and guide. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Lorenzo pulled him into another hug, this one lasting longer. I love you, Deo Papa. It was the first time he'd used that nickname in years, and it made Amadeo's heart clench with joy. I love you too, little prince. Even though you're not so little anymore. They stood there on the balcony, guardian and king, Omega and Alpha, family in every way that mattered. And as the moon rose higher, casting silver light over the palace grounds, Amadeo thought about the woman who'd tried to fire him all those years ago. Serafina had been terrified that Lorenzo would love his nanny more than his mother, and in her fear, she'd nearly destroyed them all. But in the end, she'd learned what Amadeo had always known, that love multiplies rather than divides. That a child's heart is big enough to hold everyone who treats it with care. The Luna had fired the nanny, but the toddler had kept calling the Omega back. And eventually, the pack had no choice but to listen. Because some bonds transcend blood oaths and forbidden bloodlines. Some bonds are written in the stars themselves. And those bonds are unbreakable. Indy. But the story doesn't really end there, does it? Because somewhere in that palace, a young Alpha King is already planning his next radical reform. And somewhere in the Omega districts of neighboring packs, young wolves are hearing whispers of a place where bloodline doesn't determine destiny. Where love is stronger than law. Where an Omega from a forbidden bloodline became Lord De Laurentiis simply by refusing to abandon a child who needed him. The revolution has only just begun. And it all started with a toddler's cry in the night. And an Omega who chose to answer.